All right, diving in today, folks, to a topic that, honestly, I think we all need to understand better:
Definitely.
how we heal from trauma.
Yeah.
And to help us do that, we've got excerpts from Narrative Exposure Therapy by Schauer, Neuner, and Elbert.
Great book.
It is, it is. So in this deep dive, we're really aiming to get to the heart of narrative exposure therapy, NET, and how it can help people who've experienced some pretty, well, some pretty significant trauma.
Yeah. It can be life-changing for people. Really powerful stuff.
Totally, totally. But, before we even get into NET itself, we kind of have to define trauma. Like, what are we even talking about here?
Makes sense.
So the book defines psychological trauma as, well, it's arising from either experiencing or even witnessing something life-threatening,
Yeah.
or involving severe injury, or like the real possibility of being injured, right?
Absolutely. It has to feel real in that moment.
And what's key here, and the book really emphasizes this, is that these events make you feel completely helpless, horrified, just completely terrified.
Yeah, it's that feeling of being overwhelmed.
Right, and your body's like freaking out.
Yeah, your whole system is in overdrive.
Total fight or flight mode.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the bad thing that happened, right?
Yeah.
It's that feeling of like, I can't do anything about this.
Right.
Combined with, like you said, your body just going haywire. That's the trauma.
Right, and the book dives into some specific context where, unfortunately, trauma is pretty much a given, and two of the kind of the big ones are organized violence. So think like warfare.
Right. Genocide, systematic stuff.
Exactly, like violence that's planned and directed.
Yeah, it can be so devastating for entire communities.
Absolutely. The book calls it a systematic strategy by a group, usually with like a central command targeting specific groups of people. And then you've got familial violence,
Yeah.
which happens way more than we'd like to think about. And that can be physical abuse,
Sexual.
emotional abuse, neglect, just all sorts of awful stuff. And it's all happening within a family, the place where you're supposed to be safe.
Right, where you should feel protected.
Exactly. And, trauma within a family, especially when it happens to kids.
Oh, absolutely. It can mess you up for life.
Yeah, it can. It impacts how you develop, how you see yourself, how you relate to other people, everything.
And it can be so hard to break free from those patterns.
Yeah, and to understand why a therapy like NET is even necessary, we need to look at PTSD.
Post-traumatic stress disorder, right?
Yeah, and the book lays out the DSM-IV criteria, which includes, well, first you have to have gone through a life-threatening event, right?
Right, and felt that terror, that
Yeah.
helplessness.
Yeah. And then there's reliving the trauma, like flashbacks,
Nightmares.
avoiding anything that reminds you of what happened.
And that hyper-arousal, always on edge.
Like you can't sleep, you're just constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Exactly. And it has to last for a while, at least a month, according to the DSM.
Right, and it has to mess with your life, like you can't function normally.
Those are important distinctions for clinicians to make the diagnosis.
Absolutely. And PTSD often comes with other mental health challenges, right? Like depression.
Anxiety, substance abuse.
The book calls it comorbidity, meaning PTSD rarely exists in isolation.
Right, it's like a gateway to other problems.
It really is. It's like your system is just overloaded and vulnerable.
Exactly.
Okay, so this part's fascinating, but kind of disturbing.
Oh, yeah.
So the book talks about the body's response during a traumatic event, calling it the defense cascade.
Okay, so it's not just one thing.
No, it's a whole sequence. So first, you freeze, like you're totally mobile but hyper aware.
Interesting.
And from there, you might go into fight or flight, right? Like your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, adrenaline and all that.
Makes sense.
But if you can't fight or flee, the book says you might shift into fright.
Fright.
Yeah, like tonic immobility, you're frozen, but you're also kind of dissociating.
Oh, wow. It's like your brain's checking out.
It is. Then there's flag, which is flaccid immobility. Your parasympathetic nervous system takes over.
Okay.
And then in extreme cases, you faint, like complete shutdown.
It's incredible how the body tries to cope.
It really is. And this leads us to another crucial concept from the book: hot memory versus cold memory.
Okay, I've heard of that. Tell me more.
So during a traumatic event, all the sensory details, the emotions, everything, it gets stored in this hot memory.
It's like a live wire.
Exactly. And it's often fragmented, like snapshots with intense feelings attached.
Right.
Cold memory is your regular memory, like facts and events, but without that raw emotion.
Okay.
So the key insight here, and this is what makes PTSD so hard, is that the hot memory is unprocessed.
It's just sitting there waiting to be triggered.
Right. And that's where NET comes in to bridge that gap.
I see. So how does it actually do that?
Well, NET was designed specifically for PTSD from organized or familial violence or other major stressors.
This is for people who've been through a lot?
Yeah, especially multiple or ongoing trauma.
Okay. So what's the basic idea behind it?
Well, the core principle is this. By telling your story, like really vividly describing the trauma over and over again alongside the good things in your life,
Mm-hmm.
you can integrate that hot memory into a coherent narrative.
It's like you're taking the emotion out of it and making it part of your story.
Exactly. The goal is to reduce the intensity of those memories and process them.
Makes sense. So it's like transforming them into cold memories, so to speak.
Right. Memories that you can understand and manage within the context of your whole life.
That's powerful. So how does it work practically?
So, NET has several key components. First, you create a narrative of your entire life, not just the trauma.
The whole story.
Yeah. And the therapist is there to support you, emotionally as you relive these events.
Providing a safe space.
Right. And they help you structure the narrative chronologically, emphasizing when and where things happened.
Okay.
And it's super important for the therapist to be accepting and non-judgmental throughout the whole process.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So walk me through the actual sessions. How does it all come together?
Sure. So the first session is all about diagnosis and psychoeducation, right? The therapist introduces themselves, explains their approach, and makes sure you understand trauma reactions.
Laying the groundwork.
Exactly. They'll normalize your responses, validate your symptoms, and explain how NET works.
Like what to expect.
Right. And they might use standardized assessments to get a better understanding of your PTSD.
Things like the CIPS, right?
Yeah, the clinician-administered PTSD scale.
And they would also check for substance use, I imagine.
They would. Now, session 2 gets really interesting.
So.
You create something called a lifeline.
A lifeline.
What's that? It's a visual representation of your life. You mark positive events above a line, often with flowers, and negative or traumatic events below the line, usually with stones.
Okay, I can see how that would be helpful.
It is. It shows your whole life journey, the good and the bad, and it provides a roadmap for the narrative.
It gives you structure.
Exactly. And the focus in this session is just on creating the timeline, not getting into the details of the events.
Got it. So when does the actual storytelling begin?
Session 3.
Okay.
You start narrating your life from birth, moving chronologically toward the first traumatic event on your lifeline.
Makes sense.
And you provide context for each event. When it happened, where, what you were doing.
The who, what, when, where.
Exactly. And reaching that first traumatic event and feeling those hot memories surface, well, that's where the real work begins.
That's where the exposure starts.
Right. Now, sessions 4 and onward are dedicated to recounting those traumatic events in detail.
So how does that work?
The therapist will encourage you to describe everything, every sensory detail.
What did you see, hear, smell? What did you feel physically?
Exactly. And they'll explore your thoughts and feelings at the time, as well as any physical reactions you had.
Like a racing heart, sweating.
Mm-hmm. And you describe these elements in both the past and present tense.
So both as they happened and how you're feeling now, recalling them?
Yeah, which can be really intense, but it helps you process those emotions.
And the therapist is right there with you, guiding you through it.
Exactly. And after you describe a traumatic event, you move on to the next event on your lifeline, continuing chronologically.
Okay, you're weaving the whole story together.
Precisely. And finally, in the last session, you reread the entire written account which the therapist has been creating from your narrations.
Wow. Must be powerful.
It is. And you sign this document, which becomes your survivor's testament.
Your testimony.
Right. It's a record of your journey, and in cases of organized violence, it can be used as evidence for human rights efforts.
That's amazing. It gives people their voice back.
It does. Now, what happens if someone gets overwhelmed during those exposure sessions?
So that's bound to happen. Trauma is intense.
The book has guidance for that. If you're super anxious, the focus shifts to the sensory details of the past trauma.
Grounding you in the present.
Right. And then you gently bring your attention to your sensations in the therapy room.
Showing the contrast between then and now.
Exactly. But if you shut down, the therapist might encourage gentle movement.
To get back in your body.
Exactly. And they'll encourage you to keep talking, even if it's hard.
To stay present.
Right. They might even use scents or tastes to ground you in the present moment.
Interesting. And what about avoidance? Isn't that a big part of PTSD?
It is. So the therapist makes sure you don't stop the exposure too soon.
You have to see it through.
And they'll help you re-engage with things you've been avoiding.
Like triggers.
Right. They're also mindful of anything in the room that might trigger you.
A smell, a sound, anything.
Anything.
Yeah.
And they'll address those triggers directly. Same with any associations with disgust or bodily fluids, if that was part of the trauma.
It's about being really sensitive to all those details.
It is. And finally, they'll help you identify and focus on cues of safety in your present environment.
So you feel more secure?
Exactly. So, with all this repeated narration and processing, what's the end goal?
Well, the idea is that those traumatic memories become less intense and more integrated into your life story. It's not that you forget, but the memories lose their power.
Right. The therapist helps you put the pieces together, create a coherent understanding,
And over time, you habituate to the memories.
meaning you react less strongly to them.
Exactly. And that allows a hot memory to become a cold memory.
And that shift changes how you see yourself, how you understand the trauma, and it helps you develop better coping strategies.
So it's a holistic transformation.
It really is. Now, there's also KidNet, which is net adapted for children.
Tell me more about that.
It uses the same principles, but in a way that's developmentally appropriate for kids.
So more play-based, I imagine.
Exactly. Drawing, puppets, things like that. And the research shows it can be really effective for kids who've experienced violence.
That's so important. Kids need specialized support.
They do. Finally, the book talks about self-reflection for therapists doing this work.
Why is that so crucial?
Because working with trauma can be incredibly emotionally demanding, even for professionals.
It can take a toll.
It can. So therapists need to be aware of their own reactions, their triggers, their limits.
To avoid burnout and secondary trauma?
Exactly. They need to take care of themselves so they can take care of others.
Makes sense.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into NET, what are the main takeaways you think our listeners should remember?
Well, I think the biggest one is that NET offers a structured and proven way to heal from trauma. It's about reclaiming your story and finding peace.
Right. By integrating those traumatic memories into your life narrative, you can reduce their emotional power and move toward healing.
And you can start to feel more in control.
Absolutely. And personally, I was fascinated by the concept of hot versus cold memory
Me too.
and how narrating your experiences can actually shift those memories.
It's like a form of alchemy almost.
It is. And the Lifeline, that's such a powerful visual tool.
It really helps to see your whole life laid out.
It does. And the fact that there's a version of NET for kids, KidNet, shows how adaptable these principles are.
It's about meeting people where they are.
Absolutely. And for anyone who wants to learn more, the book we've been talking about, Narrative Exposure Therapy, is an excellent resource.
It's comprehensive and easy to understand.
And there's tons of research out there on NET's effectiveness.
Lots to explore.
So I'll leave you with this. How might the act of telling our stories, even the hard ones, help us all become more resilient? And could understanding hot and cold memory change how we process all our life experiences, not just the traumatic ones?
That's a great question. It makes you think.
It does. Anyway, thanks for this incredible deep dive into NET.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad we could talk about this.
I am too. It's been really eye-opening.
Me too.
So until next time, keep diving deep, everyone.
Take